Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our annual MS&E Black Alumni panel hosted by the Department of Management Science and Engineering and the MS&E Career Collaborative Program at Stanford. My name is Linda Esquivel, and I'm your host and moderator for today's panel. It's my pleasure to welcome back and introduce our panelists and MS&E alums. I'm actually going to let them introduce themselves.
Hi, everybody. I'm Duru Ahanotu, and I graduated in '91 with in mechanical engineering and got an honors in what's now called STS, Science, Technology, Society. Got my PhD in the department when it was Engineering Economic Systems in 1999. Grew up in Berkeley. I currently live in Union City, California. My father was from Nigeria. My mom's is from Alabama. And I currently work at dictionary.com, and I lead a small analytics team. Basically, we run just about anything that touches data, we're responsible for in the company. And before that, I came from Yahoo, well, essentially Yahoo or Verizon Media, where I led a data science and data engineering team within the marketing group.
Thank you. Aisha, did you want to go next?
Hey everyone, I'm Aisha. I graduated from Stanford a few years ago, currently work at LinkedIn as a product manager on the search team. I'm originally from Columbus, Ohio, grew up there, but then I've been in the Bay Area since Stanford. I'm excited to be here with y'all.
Thank you.
Sure, Cecil Talbot, graduated in 1991, also with Duru, and Duru and I go way, way back. We were freshman roommates in Naranja. I guess currently working with a company called Spiring Communications. It's a test and measurement company that focuses on providing test equipment to equipment manufacturers, service providers, helping them do tests before the field. I've also worked in a bunch of other different areas with including Texas Instruments and semiconductors. I actually worked in a wafer fab facility where it's probably my only time of doing actual industrial engineering work. And I've also worked for companies such as Akamai, Newstar, and a few others in that space. Currently based out of Washington, D.C. Also have a graduate degree in industrial engineering from Georgia Tech as well. And glad to be here as well.
Thank you. Rollins?
How we doing, team? How we doing? My name is Rollins Stallworth. I'm originally from Reno, Nevada, biggest little city in the world. I ended up, at Stanford, graduated in 15 with my undergrad in management science and engineering. Did a one-year co-term in communication. Following that, I went and had a cup of coffee up in the Canadian Football League for a little bit. I played football and ran track for the Cardinal. And from there, I came back to the Bay, started the first step of my career at a firm called T3 Advisors, which is a commercial real estate brokerage and advisory firm for high growth tech companies. And actually recently, as recent as of last week, signed actually on the dotted line to go and jump into the venture capital side of things as an early stage investor. And so currently located in New York, going to be moving back to the Bay and working with a new VC fund, investing in kind of Series A high-tech startups. So excited to be here, excited to learn and grow and discuss with this panel. So I appreciate you, Linda.
Thank you. And we're excited to have you come back to the Bay Area. So we're going to start with the questions that we had prepared. And the first one being, how has your experience at Stanford prepared you for your career?
I'll go. So I would say the experiences I had at Stanford, especially from an engineering standpoint, when it was industrial engineering, now MS&E, allowed me to have ways to think critically. Having only really done kind of one role out of school that was, I would say, kind of traditional, i.e., I've had to figure out, those things that I learned as far as ways of thinking and problem solving, to apply those in other areas. And I think that is one of the things I have taken from the program specifically that have allowed me to kind of move into different areas and work for companies that did not exist when I graduated in 1991. A lot of most of the companies I worked for were not even founded then. And so getting into new technologies and learning how to apply the principles of thinking, I think is probably my biggest takeaway.
I guess I can go next. We probably have to have a rotation.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I obviously stayed at Stanford for a very long time. And, you know, one of the big things that I learned from my experience was basically just to take on challenges and to be confident in applying my skill set in a variety of domains. You know, I jumped around, or I shouldn't say jumped around, but I moved around a lot of different areas of expertise. And that's what I've done in my career as well. And it's also encouraged me to and motivated me to just explore different things. And I will say that when I took decision analysis with Professor Howard, it was the first time in my academic life where I took a course that fundamentally changed the way I thought. It was just so eye-opening to have an approach like that that can lead to clarity of thought and clarity of decision making. So that really opened up a lot of venues for me in terms of just being, you know, I always like to say, make decisions with no regret. And I feel like I've lived a life of no regret thanks to that class.
Aisha, did you want to?
Yeah, so I think more broadly, I had so many team projects and a lot of collaboration, which I feel like as a product manager, I'm sitting in meetings day in, day out. So I think that was really helpful. The other thing, MS&E, I think 125, I have pulled up those notes so many times for my job because before this, I was on like sales operations and business operations, and I would be like in SQL and in R doing stuff. And so very tactically, I've used some of those skills in my job as well.
Rollins?
Yeah, I mean, I would double click on everything that was said, right? I think on more the qualitative side, the ability to kind of connect and maneuver and be flexible around different people, different teams, different problems you're trying to solve. And then on the quantitative side, I think Duru said it best around the using data and a framework and analysis in order to make decisions and make an efficient decision, whether you're a team lead and need to make a call to go a certain direction, or whether in your personal life or within your career to go and choose this path over this path, or create this process to get this outcome. I think it widely applicable to all facets.
So another question kind of stemming from that one is, why did you choose MS&E? Or if it wasn't MS&E, why did you choose the program that you were a part of before? Duru, you can go first.
Sure. Maybe I have the craziest story. So I was a mechanical engineer as an undergrad, and I applied for mechanical engineering as a grad and EES as well. And actually, I didn't intend to go to grad school, but around that time, a recession hit, and I figured I should get at least one more degree to be more competitive in the job market. My initial plan was really just to go to Atlanta, which was an up-and-coming city then, and just have a good time for 5 years and then get serious about my career. But the recession made me change my mind. So I chose it because I was either going, if I didn't get into this program, I was just going to focus on, deep diving into mechanical engineering. But the thing that really attracted me to the department at the time was the multidisciplinary aspect of it. And I really wanted to marry an understanding of engineering with, at the time, I was just, had this general concept of business. And I thought that EES would allow me a variety of things to venture into. And that's what was really attractive about it. And then as it turned out, Professor Sweeney had the wisdom, I guess, to admit me into the PhD program. And that pretty much changed the course of my life because I decided to give it a go and went on to get the PhD, obviously.
I think Duru and I have been tied at the hip for so many years. It's all these things that kind of, I had an interest in mechanical engineering and decided that industrial engineering was more of an interest to me. I think looking at some of the classes, I liked some of the thought and problem solving and mathematical analysis that comes with operations research. I still remember one of my favorite examples, trying to figure out one of the transportation models, and the professor said, we'll get to this at the end of the class, of trying to figure out how do you solve the queuing problem at the post office. for Stanford. And at the end of the class, he said the simplest way is just to go to downtown Palo Alto. And so I still remember that. It's some things, we're trying to solve, and there's a simpler solution. And so, that stuck with me. I mean, plenty of things in the classroom as well, but I think, again, that kind of critical thinking, that decision analysis, and sometimes we're trying to solve things, and there may be a different approach that we need to take. And so, that those type of classes kind of kept me, I guess, interested in thinking critically, looking at kind of that, as Duru said, the decision analysis, and figure out how do we go about sometimes even defining the problem before we try to go and solve it. And so that's what I think drove me into wanting to pursue the major in industrial engineering, which is now, of course, MS&E.
And if I can just hop on that really quickly. So you're reminding me, Cecil, that if I had known what industrial engineering was when I came to Stanford, I might have done that instead, but I had already made up my mind back in senior year in high school, and I was laser focused on mechanical engineering at the time. So again, if I maybe had a decision analysis framework back then, I would have been an industrial engineer and had a smoother path into EES.
And then for me, so I actually started out, I wanted to go to law school. So I started out in international relations, and then I somehow found my way to MS&E. I think I was really enticed by stats classes. And then I took a social networks class. And from then on, focused a lot of my classes around networks, not just social networks, but like all the networks classes that you could take within the department. I really appreciated the things that I got to learn. Like one of them, we got to make a kind of like a music recommendation system. It kind of failed, but you get to experiment a lot with all the different classes there.
And similar to my journey. I didn't know what MS&E was, industrial engineering. Never really thought about it. I came in thinking I was going to focus on poli-sci, but when I found out a little bit more about MS&E and the different classes and the variety of classes, for me, I don't know if I was going to be a doctor, a lawyer, like whatever's clever. I knew I had these kind of different talents and these different interests. I think math was kind of always a strong suit. And kind of that analytical itch I always had. And so MS&E kind of provided this unique opportunity to kind of go and scratch that itch while also going and open up doors that I didn't even know existed or in their classes I never took, et cetera. And so that variety of mix of skill sets was definitely the shiny object for me.
Thank you. So the next question is in regards to your experience. Did you feel accepted and welcomed at Stanford as a Black student? Rollins, do you want to go first? You want to start?
We can jump in. We get some tougher questions. What's interesting about that question for me is because I was a student athlete as well. I think my experience. I mean, we're all wrapped up in so many different identities. In a large part of my identity at Stanford was one, being Black, and two, being an athlete. And to put it blunt, those were oftentimes barriers and or kind of first level lenses that folks would look at me at and make judgments. And this is not necessarily a comment on morality or who's good, who's bad. It's just kind of the state of the state. And so for me, I oftentimes felt like I needed to not wear my football sweats or, not sit with the other, athletes or Black folks or whatnot and try to kind of separate myself to then go and exceed expectations in a way. I think as I got older throughout my career at Stanford, I grew in my confidence in terms of who I was and why I was, that allowed me to kind of lessen those insecurities. Not to say that it disappeared from the culture of what was going on, but candidly, I definitely felt that during my time.
Duru, do you want to go next?
Sure. So acceptance has all sorts of different layers. As Rollins was alluding to, we carry a lot of different identities. When I first came to Stanford as an undergrad, I really jumped into the Black culture, Black life at Stanford, because it was such a thrilling experience for me to be around so many brilliant Black minds and people who had big aspirations and were achieving great things. I really dove into that. So I felt well accepted in that community. And then, well, I didn't feel accepted on the basketball court because I was really bad. And I don't know if Cecil remembers the first time I walked out there and made a fool out of myself. I never showed up again, but that's another story. So then, yeah, so that was all good. Now, the navigating the rest of the community, I mean, the rest of Stanford was interesting. I mean, I felt quite comfortable at Stanford. I really thought that Stanford was going to be a different place. I thought it would be very stiff and very uncomfortable. And so I was actually quite amazed at how, again, speaking from my own personal experience, about how easy it was to be a Stanford student. Easy meaning just the environment, the whole dorm environment, and all the support networks that Stanford offered was just amazing to me. So I always felt pretty much accepted. I mean, there were a few exceptions, but nothing that deterred me or derailed my experience.
Cecil, did you want to?
Sure. I was going to see if Aisha wanted to go first, but yeah, I think too, Duru, we're kind of the same era, and clearly being roommates, I came right in. I was like, hey, I got this little genius over here as my roommate. This is going to be easy. And he looked somewhat like me, and he had his, I think his mother went to Berea College in my home state of Kentucky. So, I mean, there were already some synergies. But I think for me, coming from Louisville, my high school was about 28% Black. And so I felt comfortable there. And there were plenty of Black students that were doing well in the classroom. I'd also attended Phillips Academy, Andover, for 3 summers in a math and science program. And 3 summers after my freshman, sophomore, and junior year in high school. And a lot of those students, where there were students every year that went to Stanford, they would always come back. And so I think I showed up at Stanford kind of expecting to do well, and knowing that there was already kind of a groundwork that had been laid before me of those that I was very familiar with, having spent time with them in the summer. So I came in kind of expecting to come in and be large and in charge. Of course, I got humbled, but I think the confidence definitely helped me, that I felt like I belonged, because there were already people I knew that had been here that looked like me, that were doing well. I think being in Naranja, being next to Ujima was great, just because you got to see that on a regular basis. So people like, hey, you weren't at Uj. I mean, Naranja is right next door, and it's almost an extension. And so I think that helped, because you got to see it every day. And so not that if you're in some other part of the campus that you can't, but it's so right there. And I think a strong National Society of Black Engineer, or a SESB, Society of Black Scientists and Engineer, that was great. I mean, I think when I got in there and I could see, freshmen through grad students, and they were all actively making sure that, hey, you're not only going to just do okay at Stanford, you're going to thrive, and you're going to enjoy studying hard and learning, and everyone's going to make sure that that the next generation continues to do as good, if not better. And so for me, that was kind of my experience. There was never a doubt of it wasn't going to be a good experience, or there was going to be something that was going to be difficult. It was, there was going to be some work to be put in, but there was, the support network was there, and everyone was going to make it through.
Thank you.
For me, I think I didn't know what to expect going to Stanford. I'm from Pickerington, Ohio. A lot of people didn't even know what Stanford was. So I was a little nervous going in, but I think I was able to really find my community. I was in Trancos, but I was in the NAACP. And so right away found people that I was able to make community with. And I think the Black community was really where I found home and found a lot of acceptance. And even within MS&E, because there weren't a ton of Black students in MS&E, I want to say. So even for our senior project, our group was BCG. So play on BCG, but we were the Black consulting group. And so I think I was able to find a nice community even within the major.
Thank you.
And Linda, if I could just add real quick, I have to give a lot of credit to key professors in my both undergrad and grad experience, who really helped me feel like I was, like I was accepted and where I belonged. Professor Sweeney, again, was really key, both undergrad and grad. You have to remind me, Cecil, I think wasn't he an advisor when we
He
were
was
undergrads?
right. He was my freshman advisor. And so
Yeah.
that point to your point, I mean, I came in and he was very nurturing. I think I did Thanksgiving dinner there at one point. I mean, so he opened up his home, and I mean, there was a definite huge support from Professor Sweeney. Absolutely.
Yeah. And the great thing is that when I joined the department as a grad student, it just continued. I mean, I continued to run into professors who were very supportive. And so I always felt accepted. I mean, Professor Schachter, my thesis advisor, Professor Say, I just thought I should give them credit here since I have a moment. On and on and on it went. So, the department's been great from that perspective.
Kind of going off of that, did anybody else have memorable professors or courses that they took with us?
Memorable, you mean they're like classes or experiences?
Yeah.
Okay, so I already mentioned my Professor Howard experience. He was also one of my readers for my qualification process. But the other experience I had was, again, with Professor Edison Say. So back in the day, I don't know if it's the same now, they encourage PhD students to take a year off and get some real world experience. And I had gotten a job with Booz Allen and Hamilton out in New York. And I realized that if I went out there, I'd be away from the department for a year, and I wanted to make sure I maintained some connections back to the department. So I went through the list of professors and found someone who seemed to be in an area that I was likely to study for my dissertation. And the professor I happened to look up was Professor Edison Say. When I told him my interests and what I wanted to do, he said, you know what? I mean, I'd never forget this. He said, you know what? I don't think that job is the right job for you. I have this friend, and it happened to be a software company, and I didn't know it at the time, but Professor Say was the co-founder of this company. He said, I have this friend who could probably use you. You give him a call and see what can happen. And so I did. That day I gave a call, and suddenly I had an interview. The next day I had the interview, and by the end of that day I had a job. And I was like, oh my goodness. And again, just in terms of, like I said, this department has been very supportive of my academic and career. That again was just such a life-changing moment, and I credit the department for that. That I worked with that company more than a year. I went another 3 years, I think. I went well into my graduate studies. So I was actually being a student and working for that company. It was a small software company. So that's another important milestone that I thank MS&E for.
Did anybody else want to add to that before we move on to the next question?
I think I'll throw out there. My favorite class was actually MS&E 180 with Eisenhardt. I think it was organizational theory and behavior. I don't know if the name has changed since that time, but I remember that was one of those kind of hallmark classes for me that allowed me to start thinking about business and organizations in such a way that I viewed athletics and playing football and being a coach, and how being a manager is like being a coach, and you got players that have different skill sets. You got to put them in the position to be as successful as possible, and they got to work together, et cetera. And that to me was a real kind of pivotal point in my career at Stanford to kind of make that jump and that crossover and see how what made me passionate about sports and athletics wasn't necessarily proprietary to sports and athletics, and I can go and apply those passions and skill sets elsewhere. So that was definitely a class that fired me up.
Very nice.
And I would say for me, so I already mentioned 125, which is one of the core classes, but for my final project there, we did a project with the Chicago public school system, and I actually used a lot of what I learned there when I did an internship with Stanford in New York, and I worked for the New York public schools in a nonprofit with that, and so it was like very relatable to the work that I was doing. And then I would also say Melissa Valentine was one of the professors who had a lot of impact as well. I remember her telling me, what do you think, what are the things that energize you? What are the things that don't energize you? And it helped me really think about what I wanted to do after Stanford. And she had a really cool class where we even got money to like hire people from Upwork and build an app. So it was very hands-on and relevant.
Sure, she'll be happy to hear that. So the next question is, what advice would you give students who are still at Stanford? What should they consider?
It's always such a broad question, right? So if the question is related to advice about how to make the most of your MS&E experience, I think you've heard some of that. Definitely, as you can tell from my experience, I approach professors, freely, and found them to be extremely receptive to talking and providing guidance and support. Just Stanford has such rich amounts of resources that you have to, just dive in and take advantage of as many of them as you can. Time is very short. It's amazing how fast it goes. And you can't do everything, of course. One of the things, actually, I was talking to someone about this just over the reunion weekend, is that one of the things I learned quickly coming as an undergrad is that I actually had to figure out what I couldn't do, because I was just interested in so many different things that I actually had to put things aside that I just didn't have time for. So there's a time for exploration, and then there's a time for really focusing and building out your expertise, and finding that balance is really critical in a place that is so resource rich like Stanford.
Yeah, I would agree with Duru. I think there are so many things you can do while you're there. I mean, we went 30 plus years ago, but when I look at students now, I mean, there's still a plethora of opportunities out there. And I think from a classroom standpoint, one of the things, even just from a campus kind of getting around, I mean, I know Duru and I did this. I mean, we would try to go and literally eat in other dining halls and not just limit ourselves to Lagunitas, even in our freshman year, just to force ourselves out of the comfort zone to go and have interactions with students in other areas of the campus, and to kind of have those interactions. Serving as nominations commission chair, being in NESB, playing intramural sports, worked at Robley Gym. I mean, all those things where you're interacting with kind of the full fabric of Stanford, I think is what I would encourage students to do. I mean, if I had to, probably the only thing I didn't do when I was there, which was more difficult, and I applaud Stanford now for, I think, making it much, much easier, is I didn't go overseas. And so that's probably my only regret, is I would have loved to have had a quarter overseas, and just it didn't work out. Now looking back, since I did actually finish my major a quarter early and had spring quarter with no classes, but I couldn't figure out how to do it at that point in time. But I would encourage anyone that has the opportunity to go overseas to absolutely do it. It's probably the only thing that I truly wish I had done when I was an undergrad.
I would plus one to that. Also, I also didn't get to go abroad, and that was one thing I really wish I had done, but I did get to go to New York. So take advantage of all of those opportunities. And plus one to interactions. The people that I met at Stanford are the people that have just been in so many different parts of my life. So outside of being a product manager, I also do music, and like, person from Stanford is one who made my music video. Person from Stanford is another person who's producing my album. It's like, those things are the things that I feel like you really hold on to once things from classes aren't as present in your mind.
Agreed. People. I think, Stanford, what brought me to Stanford in the first place was this notion of it being a 40-year decision as opposed to a 4-year decision, right? And that's as it pertains to relationships. And, even have we've experienced today, or even before this call, you mentioned Stanford and Stanford alum, there's this like embedded trust with that other person and that other human that allows you to kind of get deeper and draw in that connection, which is huge. So I think as many relationships and people that you can get involved with and meet and learn and grow from, the better.
Thank you. So we're going to kind of move back into the professional side of things, and I'm going to be asking you about any challenges you have faced as a Black professional within a particular area of industry, and if you could chat about that or give an example. So I know we have some people in finance and tech and in product management, business.
We'll probably have to do multiple rounds on this one, but I'll get started. So, as a manager, I would say one of my biggest challenges is the recruitment and hiring of other Black students into my field, into data science, data analysis, data engineering. It's been an endeavor for me, and I haven't succeeded as much as I wanted to. Part of it is the environment, but part of it is just the recruiting process and where folks' interests are. So that's really been the biggest thing, and I'm continuing to try to work on that. So there's all sorts of other things. I was really involved with the Black employee resource groups, particularly at Yahoo, and that formed a very good network, both on the local campus and across the globe. And I got to hear about other folks' challenges, and it was good to have those experiences for things to watch out for, just in terms of career advice. Just watching out for the signs where you're not being treated fairly. Again, I feel like I was very fortunate, at least until the very end. And I think, for us, or again, I should speak for myself, it's when you run into those professional challenges, in the back of your mind, there's always that nagging thing like, is this just the challenges that everybody faces, or am I facing this challenge just because of who I am? And that just nags you all the time. And I've approached it as the former, but I sometimes wonder whether I should be approaching it from the latter. So that, that can always be a tension. And I'll stop there and let other folks talk about theirs. Like I said, I'm sure we could all go on and on and on in this one.
Anyone you want to volunteer to go next?
I can rock. There's plenty of opportunities or examples to call on, but in the one most recently for me, actually, I just made a career transition. I'm entering into venture capital as an early stage investor, and throughout my kind of job search process, I was meeting with a bunch of different founders and teams in different industries and potential career paths. And long story short, within that process, I got far down the line with a particular company and a particular founder. And I've known this founder for a couple of years now. He was actually a client of mine at my current firm, and good guy, is great at what he does, has had a phenomenal track record, is building this company idea and mission that's actually centered around diversity and inclusion and kind of global representation and making this positive impact on the world. And the role and the conversations we were having within the offer and what I was going to be a part of was fairly kind of intentionally ambiguous to kind of allow me to wear a bunch of different hats. This is kind of a emerging company where you kind of go and have to play a bunch of different roles. And long story short, or long story long, within the final stages of the offer, talking about the role and talking about the title, there was all of a sudden this emergence of head of diversity on as a kind of a addition to my role as like head of growth and diversity. Where to me, I'm like, oh, like you can call me whatever you want. That's not going to impact what I bring to the table on a day-to-day basis and what I do and how I do it and why I do it. But at the same time, let's double click on that, right? Because I've told you that, I'm extremely passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and the impact that has on a company and our mission and our ability to kind of do what we do from a social perspective as well as from an economic perspective. Now, I can do that without that being a part of my title, right? And so then that opened up this door between the founder and I that kind of exposed some things, right? And exposed this, something called tokenism, all these different things that you can go into. But there was this challenge or this friction that I needed to be the head of diversity in order for him to prop me up in a certain way to talk to his investors, et cetera, around, continuing their narrative and their path that they're on. Where for me, I'm like, you have to understand when I've head of diversity on my title and I'm sitting around the leadership table, I all of a sudden get undermined by the perception that, oh, the only brother at the leadership table is the head of diversity. Like, of course, you know what I mean? Like, like everything else, me being head of growth, me being head of strategy, anything else that I'm doing or contributing gets lost in the sauce because they see Black and they see diversity. So I had to go and explain that and understand, and that was just a whole bunch of friction, right? And we ended up getting to somewhat of a common ground, but I ended up going a different direction, right? And because those are some red flags and some signals there that, I want to use it as a learning opportunity for all involved, and why I'm bringing it up here today. But that's just kind of one of many kind of examples of how the double-edged sword of folks trying to do well or do things the right way, but kind of the negative impacts that it could potentially have or unintended consequences.
One thing I can share, so work in tech, obviously, and I think representation is a huge issue. And so one thing that I've had to work on is when I'm the only Black person in the space, realizing that I can't take responsibility for everything, and like making sure that people know that just because I'm the Black person in this room, I can't speak for all Black people. So I think especially being like a product manager now, but even in my previous roles working like very close to product, we are making decisions that impact a lot of people, that impact Black people. And especially like some initiatives have been, like a lot of things that I've worked on have been around like equity or certain populations, but taking that responsibility off of me too, because I would go home and be so stressed. Like, did I make the right decision here? Did I have the right voice? And so coming back to be like, hey, no, we need to get more, like we should always be working on getting more people in those rooms, but even in these cases, like how can we continue to pull other voices? And I think the other piece of it too is realizing, I mean, similar to Rollins' point, with like working on equity and some of those things, how do I make sure that I'm not just being put in a box, and how do I make sure that my role expands past it? Like, even though those are things that I'm very passionate about and really care about, how to make sure that I'm being taken seriously in all types of spaces.
I would say that for me, a lot of what I guess kind of thought about, again, having always worked for technology companies, was probably my first role. I work in Texas Instruments in Dallas, and similar to Duru, there was a huge Black employee network there, very active, and I think the fact that there was a huge diversity of students or they were being hired kind of straight out of college, is all the way up through people that have been there 20 or 30 years, and they were coming from Big Ten schools, from the Stanfords of the world, a lot of HBCUs, and so that shaped my perception of what a company should do. When I hear companies say we can't find Black talent, I'm like, you're just not looking in the right places, because there's always been Black talent there if you choose to go and find it, whether it's at a Stanford or at an HBCU. And so I think, being in the work world, that kind of shaped kind of my expectation. Companies should be doing this. And I think one of the things that they realize, and I've seen this in other roles that I've had, is there's a dollar value that can be associated with that, and it's good for business. And so you can have the diversity to Rollins' point. I mean, you don't need to put this title on there. Let me go do my job and do it well, and you're going to reap the benefit, because I know a couple of different times I've been in roles, especially in the DC area, going into the federal government, and this is kind of before LinkedIn, and you could click on people's pictures and see who they were. Somebody saw Cecil Talbot, they had no idea who I was, what I looked like. And I walk in there, and I mean, you could see people's eyes get big. And a lot of times it's people look just like me, and they would be excited because they typically never saw anybody that looked like them coming in to call on them and help them solve their problems, to deliver solutions. And so they would say, kind of on a regular basis, hey, Cecil, we're going to keep working with you as long as you treat us right. We typically don't see this. And so I think, companies underestimate the value of people, wanting to do business with people that don't always look like what has traditionally transpired as far as people that they have to interact with. And so, there's a value to having women and Blacks and Hispanic and Asian and whatever you want to put out there. If you have that diversity from a business standpoint, your company should do well if you encourage that and find a way to let it kind of continue to grow, but don't necessarily shine a light on saying, hey, we've got the diversity and equity person over here. It's like, that's not necessary. Let people go and excel at what they do without saying, hey, you're the great, VC person. And oh, by the way, can you BRD? Yeah. It's like, no, don't do that. Let it happen organically versus trying to force that. And I think companies that figure out how to do that have done well. I think with a wide range of kind of demographic. And I like when I see companies that have figured that out, because that means that environment is going to be good, not just for the Black or the Hispanic. I mean, it's going to be good for everyone, and it's going to work well, for all the employees.
I 100% agree with you. And Rollins, kind of thinking back about how they hired you for one role and then try to give you another title that's specifically higher for that position, instead of trying to put it on you. Like, that should have been another title and another position for somebody else. And like you said, it should be organic. So I appreciate that. So go ahead, Duru, if you want to add.
Oh yeah, I was just going to add. So that's such a dilemma, because so like I said, when I was at Yahoo, I was very involved with the Black Employee Resource Group, and I really dove into it 100%. And then when I joined my current company, I actually enjoyed taking a year off from that. A very small company, and not enough resources to do that kind of thing. But then the pandemic happened, and all the stuff that happened last year, and Juneteenth became a holiday. I decided, you know what, I'm going to grab that mantle again. Being one of the very few in the company, it's sort of like I realized, well, if I don't do it, it's not going to happen, right? It's no one else is going to do it. So there's like that double, two sides of that coin, which is you don't want to be that you don't want to have to be that person that has to take responsibility for that. But then the other hand as well, if you don't, it's just not going to happen. So, I jumped into it last year, and I organized a resource list for everyone so that they could participate in Juneteenth. It was great actually last year, because you could participate in Juneteenth celebrations all over the country remotely. I wish people had thought about that, years ago. But then this year rolled around, and then I thought again, I was like, well, I don't want to have to do that again. And, it didn't happen. Of course it didn't happen. So I just go back and forth now with that dilemma of not wanting to always have to be that person to, wave the flag for Black cultural events and issues, but then also realizing that, it could just be the burden until we get more folks like us into spaces that we occupy.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
If there's nothing else to add to that, which I'm sure there always is, but what advice would you give to students starting their careers now?
Network, network, network. So I always say, that's what's always been useful for me. I don't think I've gotten a single job without having known someone or known someone who knew someone who was connected to the position. And now networking is so easy. I don't think there's any excuse, there's every reason to be networking, right? It's the barriers are so low. And that network will work for you in all sorts of different ways. And you'll also pay into that network in ways that you never would have expected.
On top of that, I would say, find a mentor or mentors. And it could be someone at your company, someone in the space, someone that is not even in your space, maybe even a coach, a career coach. And, you don't have to have years of experience to have someone that helps you and guides your path and provides some direction. So I would say, doing something like that is going to be, great for your career. The other thing would be, don't just think that just because you're fresh out of college and you've got your MS&E degree that you somehow just need to affiliate only with people that are just like you, just starting out. Absolutely reach out, go find the directors, the VPs, find the C-level, challenge them, ask them questions. I think too often we think just because, we're new to the workforce that someone will not value our opinion or think that we don't have something to add. So I would challenge students who are just getting into the work world that a lot of times those companies, executives and levels below, they want to hear because they get sometimes too far removed, or they need to hear that whole spectrum, not just people that have been there for a long time or that are have certain experiences, but those that are coming in with new ideas. A lot of times, having those conversations will, I think, to Duru's point, kind of networking within the company will provide you with the opportunity to leapfrog and to move very quickly through an organization when you have those interactions, because they can see that potential that may not happen if you're just simply focused on the people that are directly kind of at your level that you're interacting with.
Rollins, were you about to, or sorry, Aisha?
I can jump in, Aisha, and then you can go. I have 2 points. One on the networking side. Actually, full disclosure, when I was first at Stanford, all I was hearing was networking, and it actually rubbed me the wrong way at first, because I was like, you're telling me I'm coming here to get education, but the most important thing for me to do is network for the potential benefit of me on the back end. That doesn't make sense, for one, and two, that doesn't align with my moral compass. So why am I here? What's going on, right? And I actually went. I'm forgetting the professor's name, and it actually might have been a guest lecturer. I forget who it was, but I went after the class and I was like, hey, this isn't sitting right. Can we talk about this more? And we talked about it, and in a 10 to 15 minute discussion and kind of debating back and forth, I realized that the point that was made was, you can call it networking, you can call it building relationships, you can call it whatever you want to call it. But for me, what allowed me to really lean into this notion that we're talking about was, if I am my kind, genuine self, and I lead with this kind of authentic curiosity around others and willingness to help others, that inevitably is going to lead to connections and relationships and intros and whatever's clever. But that's the scoreboard, right? You don't worry about the scoreboard. You just worry about getting the next first down or making the next tackle or what have you. And so when I changed or flipped that notion on its head and saying, hey, if I just go around and meet people and try to help them the best way that I can and be my authentic self, that is going to lead to positive things. And so when you ask the question around what advice would I give to career searching or going into their careers, I think while you're going and doing that and networking, or however you want to call it, also challenge yourself to look deeply within your kind of core values and your principles and your why, and specifically what makes up that why and how are those things stacked ranked against one another, right? I call it kind of like a bottoms-up approach, to where I think I've seen a lot of my fellow classmates or teammates or friends start with kind of a top down of hey, I want to be an investment banker, or I want to work at this firm, or I want to do this for potential reasons that align with them, or potential reasons that they actually at the end of the day don't really care about, or it's not going to give them much satisfaction, right? But if you start at the bottom, at the core, with who you are and why you are, then you can kind of use that scorecard or that rubric to then go and compare a bunch of different options of interest that you will collect through your networking and relationships that you build.
Building off that point a little bit too, I would say big piece of advice that I would give is graduating that first job feels so important. It feels like a very scary decision, but you have your whole career to make changes, make pivots. I graduated in 2018 and I thought I wanted to be a data scientist, didn't start as a data scientist, I'm now a product manager. And so you can shift around, you can make changes, and that's okay. The second thing I would say, to Cecil's point about not just sticking to people who have just graduated and speaking up more, I'm generally pretty quiet, maybe you can tell from this panel. And one of the big things that I definitely had imposter syndrome when I graduated and started working. And I had to learn to be very confident in speaking up in those spaces too, because people do want a fresh perspective. You do have a lot to offer right off the bat. And so you got to remind yourself of that, and don't limit yourself or limit the ways that you speak.
Yeah, a quick little point on that. I have this, I say it all the time to all my friends for everything. I know it's a little biblical here, but I always say, hey, you have not because you ask not. If you don't ask, you're not going to get it. So go beat on the door. What's the worst thing that's going to happen? Somebody's going to say no, to go somewhere else. So, I mean, you can't be afraid of failure. You can't be afraid of somebody saying no. If you don't ask, it will never be offered to you unless you ask.
Great advice. It's kind of funny that you brought up imposter syndrome, because that was one of the questions that one of our registrants or students that registered asked, was about how did you deal with imposter syndrome if you encountered it as a student or as a professional?
Okay, so maybe I can start since I brought that up. So actually, I remember having a conversation with someone on my first team. So my first team, my manager had nicknames for everyone. My nickname happened to be the brain, so I guess it was a good one to start with, because some of them were crazy. But I had a conversation with one of my coworkers who was like, "Hey, everybody deals with imposter syndrome, but we want to hear your voice more in these meetings. You have things to offer. Every time you say something, it's very meaningful. We can tell that you have thought behind it, but can you share that more?" And so it was really continuing to build up that confidence, to feel like I had a space. And then I think there was also some of like needing to prove to myself that I could do things. And so after starting to deliver certain things or like getting positive reinforcement, I think that helped as well. But it really, really comes down to confidence. And I think somebody just asked me yesterday, like, how do you build your confidence in the workplace? And that's where I believe fake it till you make it works wonders too. If you pretend that you're confident, you'll act confident, people think you're confident, and then you'll start to feel more confident.
Cecil?
Yeah, I would just say, and I don't know that I can relate in the same way. I mean, Drew and I kind of talk about, we're the gray beards now. And so it's, there's a certain level of expectation that we know a few things because, while he still has hair on my head, I don't quite have that. I have a lot more on my face, but I think at the end of the day, it's there's always some area that you can find that you're pretty good at, right? And I think to your point, Aisha, find that area that you're confident in and then use that as a building block to be confident in maybe some other area. There's always got to be some area where you're going to find your confidence in the workplace. And so finding that niche, okay, use that and leverage that to develop my confidence, to figure out how to go in a space where maybe somebody's expected me to be the brain or to be knowledgeable of something, and use that. And so I wouldn't say it's as much faking it or being an imposter, but find that area where you can be your true self, and develop that confidence, and then leverage that into making yourself that expert or that go-to in that other area where maybe there's that expectation that you should, but it's just you're not there for whatever reason.
Rollins?
Yeah, I'll just add this. I think this funnels into Duru's point to the last question around the importance of surrounding yourself with a team or people or mentors or coaches that will provide you a safe space to ask questions or be yourself or kind of lean into your strengths or know or understand what your weaknesses are, so then you can go and ask questions and help those out as well. I think your mentors and your day-to-day team have a lot to do with your ability to progress and learn and grow and build confidence. And so, that I think it should be a core box that everyone should be trying to check, no matter the industry, no matter the career path, is like, who am I going to be engaging with on a day-to-day? Who's going to be my mentor, my coach, my team? And how is that going to allow me to continue to learn and expedite my growth?
I think what Rollins said is very important. It's in whatever community you find, whatever sets of relationships you build in the workplace, academics, what have you, those are going to be the people who will remind you that you belong and that you're not an imposter. I think it's impossible. You're always going to run into folks who think you don't belong, but you shouldn't normalize that single event or that single person's attitude or opinion. If you had that community, those set of relationships, they're always reminding you that you belong. You could probably tell from my stories, I was very fortunate to continuously run into people who were telling me and affirming that I was where I belonged. And coming to Stanford, just the kind of kid I was, I always had a point to prove. So my mental attitude was not going to be one to accept the imposter syndrome thing. But when I learned about it in the last, I think it was 6-7 years, I could start to see, how that can start to constrain your confidence. And so I actively work against it. If I ever have a question, a doubt, running into my mind, I just try to squash it immediately. So like I was saying, just to summarize, it's important not to normalize whether they're microaggressions or someone trying to minimize you. You can't normalize that experience. Just fall back and remember, who you are and the folks that are supporting you. And it doesn't even have to be at the workplace or in school. It could be as close to you as your family, right? I'm sure this experience happens to a lot of us. When I go back to my family, they're always marveling. I remember my grandmother always marveling at the things I could do. So if nothing else, if all else failed, I could count on my grandmother to affirm that I was where I belonged, and that was golden. So there's always going to be those people you can fall back to and rely on.
I would just maybe a little piggyback before we get started, kind of to Duru's point. I think some of it that is confidence, and I think from a very early age, my first grade year, my mom, knowing kind of what society would do to somebody that had dark skin, and she would sit there and she would look at me and say, pretty brown skin, pretty brown. So I literally was in my first grade class. I was sitting there literally like stroking my arm, talking about pretty brown skin. But some of this is confidence, right? And so if you don't have that confidence, the world can knock you down. And so, we talk about safe places and, mental health and we talk about coaches, but some of that, started at an early age. You're in college now. And so, but you have to have that confidence and that belief that you are somebody, that you are special, that you were made this way, and that you have worth, and that no one can tell you something different. And so, is it grandma, is it your parents, is it a brother, is it a friend, whoever it is, somebody needs to be in your corner as your champion, as your cheerleader, and you got to find that person that keeps you going forward, that never knocks you back down and where you can't get up.
Well, yeah, I can give it a try, because I think I've heard this question before, which is I guess just kind of whether you should have more structure to your networking. And I think what Rollins was saying earlier is really the important I think framework to think about this, is that you are being your authentic, curious self. And I think if you're doing that, it will be very clear who are the folks that you've met who you really should focus in on in terms of marrying your interests with their interests. You definitely shouldn't be in the business of just collecting LinkedIn links just for the heck of it. Yeah, you'll saturate yourself, and you'll miss that one person who really was the key person that was your match.
Yeah, I'll go ahead, Ron. Oh, okay. I would say I try to get in and find that connective tissue. You'll be surprised just having some of these conversations with people. And so if you're in LinkedIn, go and look through their background. Try to find something that that you can connect with them on. It could be you have a similar interest in some sport, or you both played piano, or they're involved in some volunteer effort. And so if you can find something that is of interest to somebody, people will typically perk up and pay attention. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be from a professional standpoint, even though that would be the best thing. But it could be something that really resonates. So while someone may have a job doing ABC, they may really be passionate about volunteering in some capacity, or traveling, or they're a downhill skier, whatever, or they go and listen to Gregorian chant. Whatever it may be, if you can find that and then engage somebody that may seem like you're going to struggle to have some type of remote interaction with, because your backgrounds are different. If you find that one little small area, that's your launching pad to get in, and you'll be surprised. Some people, all of a sudden, they'll just turn a light on, and you're trying to figure out, how do I contain this energy that's now coming towards me, because you found what they're really interested in. I think, LinkedIn is a great, social media, and just in general, you can find so much information out about many people that you can use that to help, launch that conversation that in the past would have been difficult if you're just getting a business card and you have no information on someone. You've got a lot of tools, and so use those.
And to add, I think on part of your question was centered around, because I agree with both points that were made, But to attack, I think part of the question was around like what point in the idea or what kind of point in the timeline do you make the connection, or do you reach out, or do you have the conversation? And for me, I think it's less around, I think at any point, right? Like whether it's like you're thinking about this idea, or you're thinking about particularly creating this product, or whatever the idea is, you can go and find someone to ask them, hey, their thoughts. Hey, I'm thinking about this. What do you think? Does this sound good? Does this make sense? Well, would you do this? Or hey, are you connected to anybody that has been there and done that I could talk to, that you think would be helpful in my journey? Or boom, fast forward to the end of your process, and you have a product, you have a beta version of something, or you drew a picture, like whatever it is, you can go to that person and be like, hey, check this out. Look at what I built. What do you think? How, like, this is how I got there. This is where I'm trying to go. Like, how would you go about it? And kind of really lead with that curiosity, and lead with asking them about their thoughts and their experiences. And if they know other folks in their network or come across that could be helpful in your journey as well. And so that's kind of a way, or a Trojan horse, to kind of enter a conversation or a connection at any point.
I would agree with all of that. And maybe one thing that this might be a little bit tangential to what you were saying or what you were asking, but when you're reaching out to people, if you are sharing an idea or you are trying to set up time, also don't be afraid to follow up. One of the things that I've noticed is, like, I will have people reach out to me all the time. There are people that I mean to respond to, but it gets lost in my inbox, or it gets lost in my flow of messages. So don't take that personally. It's probably that they're really busy too.
Yes. That's a huge point, right? Like in the marketing realm, they consider, and when I learned this stat, I'm like, wow, I didn't even know that. Like 11 emails is the point where it's like, all right, like this person, like you should probably move on. This person's not going to respond or get you a meeting or whatever's clever. But 11 emails, like that's quite a bit of runway to go and try to get someone's attention. And so I love that point of don't be afraid to reach out, to follow up, and kind of tap and knock on that door. And back to Cecil's point, like if you don't ask, you're not going to get.
That's great advice. How did you navigate that?
I'll tell you, one of the ways to think about it, Jacqueline, is there's, I think, to Duru's point, and I had the similar challenge this the past weekend. There were so many things, and there was overlap, especially with some of the classes without quizzes, and you had to figure out. And so at the end of the day, some of this, we're making this very analytical and thinking through it, but sometimes it's just a gut decision. I mean, what speaks to you? I mean, what really resonates? I mean, there could be a whole plethora of things that you want to do, and there could be people in your ear. It's friends, it's parents, it's other people. But at the end of the day, what really speaks to you? What resonates? What gets you excited? And I think about, and when talking to some students now, and they'll talk about one thing, and somebody has an interest in finance, and they're speaking about something. But then all of a sudden they start talking about the movie industry, and it's like a switch went on, and they went from a 3 to a 10. Well, that's what they're passionate about. So similarly for you, if you're thinking about something and you're just kind of okay, but you start talking about something else and you are excited, that's what you need to be going after. What speaks to you?
Yeah, I'll just add, the passion is the important thing. I think people are really onto that now about following your passions. And then there's also the pragmatic side of it, right? Which is, like, for instance, the engineering requirements are so massive that it kind of already defines a set of choices for you. When I came to Stanford, I was really into politics. I even was an alternate senator on the ASSU. Once I really got into engineering core, I was just like, I just can't do this politics thing anymore. It's not going to be my career, so I can't really spend that much time on it anymore. And I just put it aside, and I said, I need to really make sure that I'm successful with this engineering program, and then fit things around that. So, as I was saying earlier, you're going to go back and forth, your exploration phase, your focus phase, your exploration and your focus, and just be comfortable, doing that for the rest of your life. it's going to be an important skill to have. And being interdisciplinary minded, I think really is conducive to that skill set, being able to manage that back and forth very well.
Thank you. Anyone else want to add to that? Okay. So yeah, I would say I would just second what they said about just making sure you're passionate about it, but also just being realistic, like with what you can accomplish in one day, because you don't want to burn yourself out. And yeah, just making sure that it's like, it's okay to say no sometimes too. Yeah. So there was a question from the audience, and I think this is somewhat important in terms of just, students looking at their careers. What are the most important skills you would say that is the most valuable to be successful in the tech or business world? Or what skills have worked for you in your careers?
I can start. I think there are a lot. A few of the big ones: collaboration, huge. So like, need to know how to work with people. I also think with that, sometimes folks overthink it, but like also just empathy is important. I think we've all had people where it's not as fun to work with them because they don't. You got to be able to think from other people's perspective. So that's a big one. And then communication and being crisp with your communication as well is really important. People don't have time to read long things, and you want people to understand the message that you're saying. If your work isn't understood, it doesn't get across. So those are two big ones I'd call out.
Yeah, I would say the conciseness thing is great. I was actually having a conversation today with someone. I just said the person's first name, which was a very common name, and they were like, "Oh, the guy just writes long emails and nobody wants to read them." And so, if there's any way that you can communicate, I say it all the time: can you communicate it in 3 sentences? Can't always, but if you can, it'll force you to think about, how do I make this as simple and short? Spacing in emails. I mean, if you're sending in text, it's one thing, but if you're sending emails, if somebody's going to click on that and look at it, can they look at it, get what they want in a few seconds? And maybe there's a follow-up, or maybe it requires some other action. But thinking about, I think to your point, Aisha, it needs to be concise and easy for somebody to process. That is so critical. But I think also, just as you're trying to communicate with others, that the empathy thing, and then also just how you phrase questions, right? I mean, sometimes you can go at people the wrong way when you're phrasing a question. I think sometimes being self-deprecating is good. And to kind of Rollins' point, you're sending 11 emails to somebody. Hey, I sent this email. Maybe it got caught in your spam, or maybe it got lost, or I think you might have been, basically giving people a way out. I mean, my mom has said this all the time: give people a way out. Don't put somebody in the corner. When you put somebody in the corner, they're going to fight back. And so when you're sitting there self-deprecating, kind of being very humble, it allows people that opportunity to interact with you in a multitude of ways, whether it's face-to-face or over email or whatever it may be. So I would say, that conciseness, that being easy to approach, which again kind of was Aisha's point of, you have those folks that just nobody wants to interact with. You don't want to be that label, that person. You want to be that person that's like, hey, yeah, I want to go have that conversation with that person because they're going to give me a short, concise answer. They're going to be pleasant. It's going to be fun to interact with, and I might learn something I didn't know. And so if you fit into that category, you'll continue to do very, very well.
Did anyone else want to add to that, Rollins?
The only thing I'll toss in there is the ability to learn, and grow and be coachable. And I think being that kind of forever learner is what allowed me to kind of to have my kind of career path I'm on. As I think a lot of the similar qualities are common threads with a lot of folks that I look up to and are my mentors and champions along the way, is this notion and ability to be able to learn and want to learn, have a desire to learn, and particularly learn from your failures, right? And then take mistakes and look at those with a certain perspective to then go and move forward. So I think that's always a key.
Thank you. And one of the questions was, is it possible to work on the ethics side of MS&E? That's kind of a tricky question, but I guess you can kind of take it any way you want. But yeah, ethics and MS&E.
Can I ask a question maybe of the newer folks? Is there now an ethics course or set of courses in the department?
So as far as I know, there's one course that was offered by Robert McGinnon, and he taught an ethics course because I think it's a big part of MS, or not just MS&E, but engineering in general in the school.
Right.
Engineering.
Right. Okay.
Like the ethical side of engineering.
Mm-hmm.
But
so, I mean, this wasn't offered back when I was in the department, but I would just offer that pretty much you're in this department because you're interested in how systems work, right? And how cause and effect and how things impact the efficiency and the well-being of a system. And I think if that is your core interest, then ethics has to come along with that, because bad ethics will compromise the health of many systems, right? And it'll compromise your own long-term health, mental health, emotional health. So I think ethics is a natural part of MS&E in that sense. But having said that, I didn't take any courses in it, but it just makes sense to me.
Yeah, I think it's definitely becoming more a part of the conversation in MS&E, especially now with the technological advances in AI and stuff like that. So, and data.
Yeah, I was just going to say that as a person in the data analysis, data science, data engineering realm, that I do think about ethics all the time, particularly in ad-supported businesses where ads are more valuable the more you know about who's seeing them. That's something that our industry is really we're really meeting that head on now. Particularly with a lot of the initiatives of the big tech companies and the congressional criticism and on it goes. So yeah, it's a big deal.
Thank you. Rollins, did you want to add?
I mean, the one way I was kind of thinking about it, and it might be, side note, but I took a justice class while I was at Stanford, and I don't know if it was a part of the the programming or whatnot, but something that hit home and how I applied it to MS&E in my career and whatnot was this notion. I believe it was John Rawls had, it's like the difference principle or whatnot. The philosophy was that, economic inequality, there's a way that economic inequality can be justified in the sense that as the folks at the top are getting higher, there's a string attached to the folks at the bottom, right? And like, whether that's realistic or not, like we go around that all day, but that's really how I've tried to frame my career path and my choices and kind of maximizing my potential within business and the different, being a venture capitalist and capitalism, like how can I go and use these blessings to be a blessing, right? And that's kind of how I, when I first heard the question or read it last night when you sent it out, that's kind of what my mind jumped to.
Thank you. That was a good answer. Did anybody else want to add to that before we move on?
I think the other thing that I would think about, that's how I kind of took the question, was, I mean, there are also ways in the work that you do with your MSc degree afterwards to kind of introduce that as well. So I mentioned that I worked on a couple of equity initiatives, and that was, how do we look at algorithms, make sure that members are being treated equitably, et cetera. And so I think those are some of those applications as well.
Yeah, I would just simply say, do no harm. When you're thinking through something, just how do you do no harm?
So we're coming kind of close to the end of this session. And I just kind of wanted to, I guess, if anybody else has questions, now's the time to ask them. If not, any other words of advice before we end? So each of you can go ahead, and if there's anything else you want to add or say to the students or prospective students.
Maybe I'll start, and I'll let wiser people close this out here. I would just say, this is a great forum. Let's, let this not be the end. Let this be the beginning. And so while we're here and we have a handful of students that are here, we're available. This should not be a one-off. Let us continue to be actively involved in helping you, be a sounding board. And we have a network behind us. I mean, we talked a lot about networking. Feel free. I'm in a certain space, but it doesn't mean that I don't know other people in other spaces. I think about my study partner when I was an undergrad, and we were going and working on problem sets and doing things, and she ended up going off and running the Style Network, and now she sits on the Pinterest board and Gap board, and so there are people in different places that you may not necessarily know. There are other people that have been in industrial engineering or MS&E that have gone into banking and VC, and they're managing partners at these things, and so there's a whole wider range of areas. And so I would say, absolutely find a way to reach out to us and pick our brains. We will respond, and we will do our best to make sure that current students have the opportunity to excel, and while they're there and once they get out. So please, use us so that we can help you.
Yeah, please feel free to add our panelists on LinkedIn. I'm sure they accept it, hopefully.
That's the first test. Do you apply what you learned here and start networking? With your authentic self, of course. So yeah, I want to underline everything Cecil said, and I also want to really highlight each one of you. I hope you tell your friends, your colleagues, if that's the case, and fellow students about this, because we'll also get more alumni excited about participating in these things if they know that there's a swell of eager students and colleagues and the like who are just sponges and want to absorb a lot of knowledge. Because for folks like us who participate in these things, what we get out of it is just knowing that some part of us has been of value to someone out there, and that's a really great experience to have. And the more of you that are out there, the more of us will also come to these things, and we really want to build out that community that we've been talking about this evening.
Aisha, did you want to go next? Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think +1 to both those things. Just like re-emphasizing the people aspect, the relationships aspect. I work at LinkedIn, so please add me on LinkedIn, and I will happily connect and reach out. But yeah, it was great having you all here, and hopefully we provided something. So.
Yeah, I just want to give the students that came here and spent the time and listened a shout out. Also give the panelists a shout out. I'm over here taking mental notes and going and I've learned a tremendous amount in this last hour and a half. So I just want to give a love bomb to all involved and just say I appreciate you guys, and Linda, appreciate you hosting and moderating this whole thing as well. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you all for being here. If there's nothing else to say, then I guess this concludes the event. So thank you everyone for being here tonight.